William Walker Atkinson's Mind Power. Chapter 2 is the nature of mind power. This is Chapter 3, Mentative Induction. As wonderful as is the manifestation of mind power within the limits of the form of the thing, cell, plant, animal, or person, and which produces the effects known as local action, movement, etc., there is still a greater wonder to be witnessed in the manifestation of the same power beyond the limits of the personality or form in which it originates. And it is to this manifestation of mind power that I'm about to apply the term telementation. I might as well explain my terms at this place and time. In the first place, I use the term mentation in the sense of mental activity, the term being derived from the Latin word mentis, meaning the mind, and the suffix ation, meaning action. So mentation simply means mental activity. From mentation we derive mentative, or relating to mental activity, mentate, or to manifest mental activity, and so on and so forth. From mentation also, I derive the term telementation, which so far as I know was originally coined by me several years ago. The word is derived from the Greek word tele, meaning far off, and the word mentation, just above explained. Telementation means mental activity at a distance, or mentation exerted over space, or long-range mental influence, etc. I have been led to the coining of this new term designed to take the place of telepathy, for the reason that the latter term is improper and misleading. Telepathy, according to its root words, really means to suffer at a distance, or the feeling of pain, of the pain of another. The suffix pathy being derived from the Greek word meaning to suffer. It may be used properly in connection with the sympathetic transference of pain or of disease or similar mental state, but its use otherwise is improper. It is being discarded by the best scientific authorities who prefer the term thought transference and the like. I have thought it advisable to use the term telementation in this connection, believing that it meets the requirements of the case better than any other term of which I have any knowledge. I expect it to come into general use before long. And now about the transference of mental states from one thing or person to another. I shall not attempt to go into a discussion of the phenomena of thought transference in this work, for the reason that it is too well established and too generally known to require an argument in its favor from me. To thousands of careful investigators, it is an established fact, and anyone who will take the time and the trouble to conduct the experiments may reproduce the phenomena to his own satisfaction. Moreover, there are instances of telementation arising in the everyday life of nearly every person, such instances being of the spontaneous order, that is, not having been expected or sought after. Those who are desirous of obtaining proofs of telementation beyond their own personal experiences are referred to the records of the English Society for Psychical Research, which contain the carefully noted reports of many very interesting cases which have been conducted by the Society under the most careful supervision and scientific requirements. The circulation of mind power is as real a natural phenomenon as is the circulation of air, water, or the blood. There have been many theories advanced to account for telementation, and there has been much talk of two minds, dual mentality, etc. in this connection. Well, in this work I shall have very little, if anything, to say regarding man's two minds. I, of course, am fully conversant with the subject of the subconscious and the superconscious regions of the mind, but I find this principle of telementation to have its roots still further back in the scale of evolution. back before consciousness as we know it. It existed in the created forms of matter or life, back to the plane of mind in inorganic matter. And therefore, I shall not attempt to urge any two-mind theories to account for it. In fact, I believe that the mind of man is a far more complex thing than a dual mind combination. There are many more planes and regions of mind than the objective and the subjective minds of the dual mind authorities. I find the basis for the theory of telementation far back in the scale. In fact, at the lowest extreme of the scale of things. I find it in the atoms, or in the particles which the atoms are composed. In the first chapter of this work, I called your attention to the manifestation of mind power among the atoms and particles of matter, which was evidenced by action, motion, and movements resulting from attraction and repulsion of these atoms and particles. In other words, I showed that physical forces were produced by the motions of the particles, or vibrations of the atoms, which arose from the states of like and dislike, love and hate, attraction and repulsion, pleasure and pain among these tiny particles of matter. And it is here that the elementary principle of telementation is noticeable. Here is where it may be seen in full primitive force and operation. If you will think for a moment, you will see that the motions of the atoms are twofold. One, the voluntary motion of the atom toward the other atom to which it is attracted by chemical affinity. And two, the movement of the atom occasioned by the attractive force exerted by the other atom, in the same manner that a magnet draws the needle to it. Haeckel has told us that there is the voluntary movement of the atom itself in response to the desire awakened in it by the attraction. How does it become aware of the presence of the other atom unless something passes between them? And that something must be in the nature of a mentative current, for there is nothing else to pass, because all other forms of energy being produced by vibrations of the atoms arising from mental states, the mind power must precede the physical energies, and must be the something that passes between the two atoms. Feeling the presence of the other atom, the first atom moves towards its affinity voluntarily, and just as you move your arm or walk, the atom probably exerting a push upon the ether, which must be to the atom or particle what the air is to the wing of the bird, or the water to the fin of the fish. But there is another cause of motion, as we have seen, the mutual pull of the attracting atoms. And what manner or kind of energy is it that thus draws or pulls the other atom? It cannot be electricity or magnetism, for those forces, as we have seen, are produced by the rate of vibration occasioned by the mind power in the atoms themselves. Therefore, we must go back to the antecedent force, which is mind power, and attribute to it the drawing or pulling force which moves the atoms toward each other. That this attracting or pulling force is in operation between the particles of matter, there can be no doubt. No two atoms of matter are in absolute touch with each other. There is always a distance between them, a space which thus separates them, which can never be traversed or overcome. There seems to be an individuality in these tiny particles which, although allowing them to form combinations, nevertheless prevents absolute blending or amalgamation. There was always a keep your distance, or thus far and no further principle in nature, which holds every particle of matter individual and alone. Every ion, electron, atom, and molecule of matter is alone, and is separated from its closest affinity by a touch-me-not circle of influence, which is also mentative in its nature, in my opinion. Even the hardest diamond or piece of steel is composed of molecules close together, but yet separated by this circle of influence. And every molecule is composed of several atoms between which the same law operates. And every atom is composed of many ions or electrons which have distances between them. So true is nature in her proportions and laws that scientists assert that in the hundreds of ions of which the tiniest atom is composed, excuse me, and which atom is invisible to the sight by reason of its smallness, there is a distance between observed and maintained by these particles, which bears the same proportion to their sizes that the distance between the planets of our solar system bears to their particular sizes. In other words, that the ions composing an atom are akin to a minute solar system, each ion being attracted to the other, and yet kept at its distance, the combined pull and push of the desire and the keep off, respectively, tending to cause them to circle around and around each other. And what is the force that traverses the space across which the particles themselves cannot travel? It is not electricity or magnetism, for those forces are but the results of these circling and vibrations, not their cause. And moreover, science has not discovered electricity or magnetism between atoms. And what holds the atoms and molecules of matter together, or rather in proximity? What causes their propinquity? Science answers, chemical affinity and cohesion. But these terms are merely names, and science does not explain the nature of the force employed. But it knows that it is not electricity or magnetism or any other known physical force. I answer, it is mind power exerted over the intervening spaces by telementation that attracts and holds these atoms and molecules in their places and yet keeps them at their distance. Mind power, the existence of which in atoms was postulated by Hegel, and which has always been taught by the occultists. And so finding that telementation exists in the elementary forms of substance and physical things, I am justified in looking for its presence and manifestation from that point of the scale upward. And I believe that the vibrations of mental states, feelings, desires, etc. are transmitted from one mind to another by telementation, arousing similar states, feelings, desires, etc. in the receiving mind along the lines of what we call induction in physical science. But before considering induction, I would ask you to consider the following quotation from Flammarion, the eminent French scientist, who says, "We sum up, therefore, our preceding observations by the conclusion that one mind can act at a distance upon another, without the habitual medium of words or any other visible means of communication. It appears to us altogether unreasonable to reject this conclusion if we accept the facts. This conclusion will be abundantly demonstrated. There is nothing unscientific, nothing romantic in admitting that an idea can influence a brain from a distance. The action of one human being upon another from a distance is a scientific fact. It is as certain as the existence of Paris, of Napoleon, of oxygen, or of Sirius." He further states, "There can be no doubt that our psychical force creates a movement in the ether, which transmits itself afar like all movements of ether, and becomes perceptible to brains in harmony with our own. The transformation of psychic action into an ethereal movement and the reverse may be analogous to what takes place on a telephone, where the receptive plate, which is identical with the plate at the other end, reconstructs the sonorous movement transmitted not by means of sound but by electricity." Well, as I have said, I account for the transference of mental states, etc., by the theory of mentative induction, which I believe to be the theory more fully meeting the requirements of the case than any of the dual mind or similar hypotheses. The term mentative induction will be readily understood by those familiar with the phenomena of electricity. The word induction comes from the word induce, which means to influence. In electrical science, the word induction is used in the sense of the process whereby one body possessing magnetic or electrical properties reproduces that property in another body without direct contact. In textbooks on physics, a simple experiment is often given students to illustrate magnetic induction as follows. A magnet is so placed that its poles project over the edge of a table upon which it rests. An iron nail or steel needle is held a little distance below the magnet so that it will not actually touch the latter, but will be near enough to be magnetized by induction, that is, without direct contact. The nail or needle will have an induced property of magnetism produced by the current from the magnet, and will support another nail or needle by direct contact. This induced magnetism renders the nail or needle a magnet, possessing all the properties of the original magnet, so long as the current flows. And just as a magnet may communicate its properties by induction, so may an electrified body communicate electrical states in another body without actual contact. The textbooks are full of examples to illustrate this law. The theory accepted by science is that the induction is the action of the electrical current through the ether by waves of vibration. And I hold that just as the vibratory waves of magnetism and electricity pass through the ether and produce similar properties in other bodies by means of induction, so do the vibratory waves of mind power from one mind pass through the ether, and by induction set up similar mental states in the minds of other persons within the field of induction. I hold that just as the excitement of the particles of matter, excitement being merely aroused activity, just as the excitement of the particles of matter may manifest an energy that may be transmitted to another object, removed in space from the first, and then may arouse by induction a similar state of excitement in the particles of the second object, so may the excitement of the mind among the brain cells of the animal or person be transmitted by telementation to another person or animal in whom, by mentative induction, a similar state of excitement is generated or induced. I hold that there is the closest possible relationship between motive energy and emotive energy. In fact, that both are forms of the same thing. I shall not attempt to go into details regarding telementation or mentative induction at this place, for the reason that I shall bring out the principle in detail from time to time by pointing out the manifestations and activities of these principles. But I wish you to fix in your mind, the elementary principles of mind power in its phases of telementation or long-distance effect, and of mentative induction, or the process by which like begets like on the mental plane as on the physical. The machinery of the mentative processes and activities being hidden from physical sight, we may understand these processes and activities better by using the illustration of corresponding physical processes and activities, particularly when the correspondences are more than mere resemblances, being operations of the same underlying natural laws. For this reason, the illustration or symbol of wireless telegraphy will help us to understand telementation. And electrical or magnetic induction will help us to understand the phenomenon of mentative induction. And now let us pass on to a consideration of the activities and manifestations of mind power. Excuse me. In its phases of telementation and mentative induction in living creatures, beginning with the lower animals. Chapter 4 will be Mental Magic in Animals.